Recall that we talked about errors that can be committed in recording transactions in the ledgers, such that when we test the ledger balances with the trial balance, it will not affect the trial balance. It is possible to commit errors in recording the transactions in the ledgers such that when we test it with the trial balance, it will affect the trial balance. These errors that affect the trial balance are referred to as errors affecting the trial balance. Now, in treating these errors, we will go to suspense account and trial balance. Now, what does suspense account mean? I already told you that it is possible to have errors in recording our transactions in the ledgers such that by testing the ledger balances, we have errors in the trial balance. Whenever there's an error in agreeing the trial balance, or where there's a difference in agreeing the trial balance, such difference is temporarily recorded in the suspense account pending when the reason for the differences or the reason for throwing the trial balance into difference is identified for correction. So we can define the suspense account as an account in which the trial balance difference is temporarily or momentarily recorded pending when the cause of the difference is what identified for correction. What am I trying to say? You have entered the transactions in the ledger. You identified your balances. You extracted your trial balance, but it refused to agree. Pending when you investigate the reason for the difference, you have to put that difference in an account. The account in which you put that difference is called the suspense account. So we can conclude that the suspense account comes into play where there are errors affecting the trial balance. Now, what are the errors that can affect the trial balance? The first one says improper addition of balances in the trial balance. We can just say error of what? Addition. What am I trying to say? It is possible to have entered the right transactions in the ledgers, and then when you were balancing of the ledgers, you improperly did the addition, or when you transferred the ledgers to the trial balance, you improperly did the addition. Such step or such action will make the trial balance not to agree. The next one says wrong ledger balance transfer to the trial balance. What am I trying to say? You enter the transactions in the ledgers, identified your balances, but transferred the wrong balances to the trial balance. Let's take, for instance, sales account. You enter transactions into the sales account, balanced up the sales account to be 750,000 debit the credit balance. But in transferring the credit balance to the trial balance, you transferred 100,000. That will affect the trial balance, and as such, make the trial balance not to agree. The next one says single entry made for a transaction. You can say error of single entry. Remember, in double entry, every transaction must have a debit entry and a corresponding credit entry, or a credit entry and a corresponding debit entry. Now you're taking a step in which instead of doing a debit entry and a corresponding credit entry, you did only a debit entry and ignored the corresponding credit entry, or you did only a credit entry and ignored the corresponding debit entry. Such is what we call error of single entry, and that will affect the agreement of the trial balance. The next one is omission of ledger balances from the trial balance. What am I trying to say? You have transactions recorded in the what? In the ledgers, but you omitted one ledger when extracting the trial balance. Say for instance, you have cash and you have sales in the transaction. You enter the right one in the cash account, enter the right one in the sales account. But when you're extracting the trial balance, you picked cash balance and forgot to pick the sales balance. That omission can affect the agreement of the trial balance. The next one is overstatement or understatement of account or a ledger in a transaction. What am I trying to say? In a transaction, we have two accounts based on the double entry principle. One is debited and the other is credited. If, for instance, in a transaction, we are supposed to debit an account with, say, 100,000 and credit the corresponding account with 100,000. That is the correct thing. But assuming we debited an account with 50,000 and then credited the corresponding account with what? 100,000. As you can see, one account has been what? Understated. That will affect the ledger balance that will be transferred to the trial balance. And that can affect the agreement of the trial balance. Technically or in practice, or when we test these errors, technically, we can conclude that at the end, overstatement of balances or understatement of balances is what really affects the trial balance. Entering a trial balance difference in the suspense account. What I am trying to say here is, how do you pick the trial balance difference for entering or for recording in the suspense account? So we're looking at two scenarios here. The first scenario says before suspense, that is before we put in suspense. Then the second scenario says after suspense. But in both cases, we are looking at a situation where the trial balance debit exceeds the trial balance credit. What I'm saying is the total in the debit side of the trial balance is more than the total in the credit side of the trial balance. Take this scenario before suspense. We can see that the debit items here we have what? Purchases, discount allowed, equipment, debtors, and what? Motor vehicle. For the credited items here we have capital, sales, discount received, and motor and creditors. The total credit here is 1.9 million and the total debit here is 1,985,000. As you can see, the total debit exceeds the total what? Credit by what? 85,000. Now, when we prepare our trial balance and we're seeing that the debit side is not agreeing with the credit side, that means there's an error that affected the trial balance. Then the next thing is to what? Open a suspense account. So this is the scenario. After suspense, we're still looking at when the trial balance debit exceeds the trial balance credit. So we already established the fact that the debit side is 1,985,000, credit side is 1,900,000. So the difference is what? 85,000. So we open a suspense account, as you can see here, credit 85,000. So both sides can be what? Equal. We have 1,985,000, 1,985,000. So we open our suspense account and then we say trial balance difference. Remember, the debit side is higher than the credit side by 85,000. We'll put it in the credit side here, 85,000. Here is another scenario where the trial balance credit exceeds the trial balance what? Debit. In this case, the credit side is more than the what? Debit side. Here, before the suspense, we have capital, sales, discount received, and creditors all in the credit side. We have purchases, discount allowed, equipment, debtors, and motor vehicle in debit side. But the total in the credit side says 2 million. The total in the debit side says 1,985,000. As you can see, the credit side is higher than the debit side by 15,000. So because there's a difference in the agreement, what do? We open a suspense account so that we can investigate the what? Errors. So here we have the suspense account after suspense here. So we can see the debit side having suspense of what? 15,000. So that both sides can be what? 2 million, 2 million. So we have suspense account. Trial balance difference, 15,000. So this is the first thing you do when you spot your trial balance throwing what? A difference. You open a suspense account, investigate the cause of the source of the difference, and then what? Raise journals for correction. In correcting the errors affecting the trial balance, we must understand that only affected items without a corresponding entry for correction is entered in the suspense. What am I trying to say? If we are raising journals to correct errors, we must be able to conclude that the error is affecting only one account and that the corresponding entry does not have another account that we take it. In that case, we open a suspense account. So, if the item affected is an asset or expense and it is overstated, credit the asset or expense account and debit suspense for correction. If the item is an asset or expense and it is understated, debit the asset or expense account and credit suspense for correction. In the same vein, if the item affected is a liability or income item and it is what? Overstated, debit the liability or income account and credit suspense for the correction. When the liability item or income item is understated, credit the liability or income account and debit the suspense for correction. What I am trying to tell you is that in suspense, most times, as a matter of fact, all times, the error affects only one item. The item can either be an asset, an expense, income, or liability. Remember, I told you, I said in your trial balance, by totals, assets are debited, expense are debited, incomes credited, liabilities credited. You can go back to our double entry for assets, liabilities, income, and expense. Now, get the understanding that because an asset is debited, so when it is overstated, it means you have done more debits. So for you to take it out, you must credit. So if you credit an asset item to reduce it, the corresponding entry goes to where? Suspense. Remember I said an expense item are debited in the trial balance. So if the expense item is overstated, it means that what? You have done more debits. So for you to correct that, you must take out the excess by crediting the expense. So in the correction, if you have to credit the expense, the corresponding entry goes to where? The suspense. For an income, remember I told you, I said incomes are what? Are always credited. So if your income is overstated, it means you have done more credits. So it must be what? Reduced. For you to reduce it, you debit the income item and credit the corresponding entry to where? Suspense. For income and liability items as well, is the same thing. So basically, liability and income items take the same treatment for overstatement and what? Understatement. Assets and expense items take the same treatment for what? Overstatement and what? Understatement. I'll say that briefly again. Remember, your assets are debited in the trial balance. If it is overstated, it means you've done more debits. For you to correct it, you have to credit, and then the corresponding entry is what? Suspense. If it is understated, that means you have done what? You have done less debits. So for you to what? Correct it, you have to add more to the debit. So you have to now do debit to the asset and what? Credit your what? Suspense. That's the same treatment for what? Expense as well. But in liabilities, I said liabilities usually in trial balance are credited. So if it is overstated, it means you have done more credit. So for you to correct it, you must debit it and credit your suspense. If it is understated, it means you have done less credit. So you have to add back by crediting it and debiting your what? Your suspense. The same thing happens to where? To your what? Incomes. So liability incomes, the same treatment. Asset expense, the same treatment. This is an illustration on correcting errors that affect the trial balance. Remember how our assets are treated in trial balance. Assets are debited, expenses are debited, liabilities credited, incomes credited. And in suspense, it must be that one item is affected and then the corresponding entry has no account to take it. So in that case, it goes to suspense. But where you have an account taking the corresponding entry, then it means that that error is not affecting the trial balance. So for the error to affect trial balance, it must be affecting just one item, either as an overstatement or an understatement, so that the corresponding entry can go to where? The suspense. So let's take example. So we say illustration. After extracting the trial balance of Mr. Kanayo for the month of February, it was discovered. Okay, say that again. After extracting the trial balance of Mr. Kanayo for the month of February, it was discovered that the credit side exceeded the debit side by 25,100. This difference was immediately entered in the suspense account and the necessary investigation carried out. The following errors were discovered as being the reason for the discrepancy. Raise necessary journals to correct the errors. Ignore narrations. Now, this question is saying we should raise journals and then ignore. Normally, in the last class, we talked about raising journals to correct errors with what? Narration. So that's the standard. But in this case, they are telling us to ignore narration. Okay? But if you're asked to what? Give your narrations, it's just the same way. Okay? So let's quickly solve these questions by correcting the errors. The first one there said, the sales account has been overstated by 76,500. If you look at this error here, it's affecting only one account, which is the sales account. So it means that if you correct this account, okay, by doing one entry, there must be a second entry. And because there's no account taking the second entry, it goes to where? Suspense. So let's go. The sales account has been overstated by 76,500. Now, what's overstated? That means above the original value. So that means you've done more. Now, the sales here is an income. Income is always credited to trial balance. So if it is overstated, it means you have done more credit. So for you to correct it, you have to debit the sales. Now, if you're debiting the sales, there must be a corresponding entry for the correction. So because there's no account taking the corresponding entry, it goes to where? The suspense. So there's the journal now. We have Mr. Kanayo. We have the journal here, description, debit, and credit. So we're debiting sales to correct it. Then we have the corresponding entry as suspense, 76,500. Remember, if you were narrating, we just say what? Being correction of entry, where what? Sales overstated is what? Corrected. So just speak that grammar there and move on. So the next one says what? A payment for rent to Mr. Kanayo. Okay. 74,000 in cash was omitted. Now, a payment for rent to Mr. Konayo, 74,000 in cash, was omitted completely. Remember, if you pay what? Rent in what? Cash. You have two accounts there. Rent account and what? Cash. And they say it was omitted completely. Remember, your error is not affecting trial balance. This is an error of what? Omission. And this will not have any suspense. Because you can even identify the two accounts affected here, which is rent and what? Cash. They said it was completely what? Omitted. So if you're having rent and cash, what's the double entry? Your cash is an asset. It is decreasing, so you credit. Rent is an expense, is increasing, so you what? Debit. So we what? Credit cash and debit what? Rent. Remember, we have Mr. Konayo. It's not the same thing as Mr. what? Kanayo. These are two different people, so understand that. So we have the ledger, the journal here. Rent debited with 74,000, cash credited with 74,000. As you can see, suspense is not here because you can identify the two accounts that are affected and you want to raise the journals to correct them. The next one, payment for insurance in cash was only entered in the cash account. How do you interpret this? If you pay insurance in cash, you have two accounts, cash and insurance. Credit cash, debit insurance. But now they are saying that it was only entered in the cash account. That means they have credited cash, but they did not debit what? Insurance. So the error is affecting only one account here, which is what? Insurance, an expense item. So insurance was not what? Entered, was not debited. So that means insurance has been what? Understated. So for you to correct it, what do? You debit insurance. And when you debit insurance, there must be a corresponding credit entry. That has to be what? Suspense. So here we have what? Insurance, 15,000. Suspense, 15,000. The next one says what? The purchase day book has been understated by 14,500. Just one account item here. So that means what? Corresponding entry, we have to go to suspense. But then, purchases is an expense. And remember, expenses are debited in trial balance. So if it is understated, it means you have done what? Less what? Debit. So you have to what? Add to that debit. So purchase account here will be what? Debited. So the corresponding entry goes to where? Suspense. So that's what you have. I have purchases here debited 14,500. Suspense 14,500. The next one here says payment for cleaning by check 13,500 was only entered in the cleaning account. If you pay for cleaning by check, you have two accounts, bank account and cleaning. Bank is an asset, it's decreasing, you credit. Cleaning is an expense, increasing, you debit. But now they are saying that what? It was only entered in the clean. So they debited cleaning, but they did not what? Credit bank. You see? So that means bank technically has been what? Overstated. Because if you had credited the bank, it would have reduced by 13,500. But because you did not credit it, it has gone up by 13,500. So for you to correct it, you credit the bank with what? 13,500 and debit your suspense with 13,500. So we have suspense here. 13,500, bank 13,500. The next one said discount received account has been understated by 1,002. Discount received is an income. And incomes are credited. Now, if you are understating it, it means you have done less credit. So you have to add to that credit. So if you're crediting discount received for the correction, you must do a corresponding entry in the suspense. So suspense is debited with 1,200. Discount received credited 1,200. The next one says rent income of 66,200 has been captured in the bank ledger only. So if you receive a check for rental income, it means your bank account will increase. So you debit, you credit your rental income. But they're saying they have only been captured in the bank. So that means you have debited your bank, but you have not credited your what? Rental income. So that means rental income is an income credited, but you've not done that. So for you to do it, you credit it, and then you debit your what? Suspense. So here we have suspense debited, rental income credited. Now, after raising the journals, we will now open our suspense account to be sure that the errors have been what? Cleared. So here is our suspense account. We have Mr. Kanayo. We have suspense account here. So we have description, debit, credit. Remember, in the what? They said what? It was discovered that the credit side exceeded the debit side by what? 25,100. So it means that what? The credit side is more than the debit side. So that difference goes to where? The debit side. So we have the trial balance difference here. Debit, 25,100. That is from the introduction to the question. So now we'll now go ahead to enter items that affected suspense. So we'll come to the first transaction here, the first journal entry here. You can see suspense is what? Credited. So we have credit side 76,500 against what? Sales. The next one is rent and cash, no suspense, so ignore. The next one is insurance and suspense. Suspense is what? Credited. So we have 15,000 on the credit side against what? Insurance. The next one says purchases and suspense. Suspense is credited with 14,500. So we have 14,500 in the credit side of suspense account against what? Purchases. The next one, we have suspense debited here against what? Bank. So we have bank suspense here debited with 13,500 against what? Bank. The next one, we have suspense debited 1,200. So we have 1,200 debited in suspense against what? Discount what? Received. So we have the next one here, suspense debited 66,200 against what? Rental income. So we have 66,200 debit here against rental income. So by the time you enter items that affected suspense or that concern suspense into their respective debit and credit, and then you enter the trial balance difference, the debit side must automatically be equal to the what? Credit side. So once you achieve that, you have been able to clear the errors. So this is a recheck of the what? Of the trial balance. So in order to recheck the trial balance, we use the suspense what? Account. So that is an illustration on correction of errors that affects the trial balance. I will encourage you to pick questions and then try to attempt. If you have clarifications on your questions or on the solutions, you can drop questions in the comment section or DM me for answers. You can also reach me on 08136506 or send me an email, jeremiah.dusa@gmail.com. Thank you.